Millionaire CEO was dining at a restaurant until a little girl wrote on his napkin. He cried. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Jason Blackwood tapped his finger against the rim of his crystal wine glass, barely listening to the investment bankers eager to please him. At 45, the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises had mastered the art of appearing engaged, while his mind calculated 3 moves ahead. The dim lighting of Pinnacle Restaurant cast shadows across the faces of everyone at the table. Everything in Jason's life ran according to plan. Every decision calculated, every risk measured. His empire had been built on this precision. The waiter appeared silently, removing his appetizer plate. As the porcelain lifted, Jason noticed something underneath, a folded napkin. Curious? He picked it up while maintaining his practiced smile. "Excuse me," he said, unfolding it beneath the table. The handwriting was childish, but neat. "My grandmother Margaret is dying. She says you're my father. We're at Pine Hills Shelter. Please come before it's too late." Jason's hand froze. The conversation around him faded to white noise. Margaret, a name connected to Emily, his first love from nearly a decade ago. Their relationship had been passionate until his company demanded everything from him. He had chosen ambition over love, never looking back. "Mr. Blackwood, about the projection figures." Jason stood abruptly, the chair scraping against hardwood. "I need to leave. Family emergency." The words felt foreign in his mouth. Family. He'd never used that excuse before. 20 minutes later, his Bentley pulled up to Pine Hills Shelter, a stark brick building with windows glowing yellow against the night sky. Jason sat motionless, knuckles white against the steering wheel. Inside, a tired-looking woman led him down a hallway to a small office. "She's been asking for you," the director explained. "Margaret insisted we find you if anything happened." Jason's voice was barely controlled. "Where is she?" The girl who entered minutes later stopped Jason's heart. 8 years old with blonde, hair falling around a delicate face. But it was her eyes, startlingly blue and penetrating, that made his breath catch. His own eyes looking back at him. She extended her small wrist, revealing a crescent-shaped birthmark identical to his own. "Hello," she said quietly. "I'm Sophia." The empire builder, the man who controlled boardrooms with a glance, found himself speechless. In that moment, Jason Blackwood realized that all his billions meant nothing compared to the small girl standing before him, the daughter he never knew he had. Jason stared at Sophia, his mind racing to process the reality standing before him. The small office in Pine Hills Shelter seemed to shrink around them as the director shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I understand this is quite a shock, Mr. Blackwood," she said, breaking the silence. "Perhaps you'd like a moment alone with Sophia." Jason nodded numbly, unable to tear his gaze from the girl's face. The director stepped out, closing the door softly behind her. "How did you find me?" he finally asked. Sophia's small fingers twisted, the hem of her faded blue sweater. "Grandma kept a box with your business cards and newspaper clippings. She showed me your picture before she..." Her voice wavered slightly. "Before she got really sick." Jason sank into a chair, bringing himself to eye level with his daughter. His daughter. The concept was still impossible to grasp. "Emily never told me about you," he said, the words heavy with regret and a hint of anger. "Why didn't she tell me?" Sophia shrugged, her eyes, so unnervingly like his own, watching him carefully. "Mom said you were building important things, that you had your own life." She paused. "She said someday when I was old enough I could decide if I wanted to find you." Jason felt a sharp pang in his chest. Emily had protected him from responsibility while sacrificing herself. It was so like her, generous to a fault, even toward the man who had abandoned her. "When did your grandmother?" 3 days ago, Sophia replied with the straightforward clarity of children discussing unbearable things. "She held on as long as she could." The director returned with a folder of documents. Emily Harrison named you as Sophia's father on her birth certificate, though she never pursued any legal acknowledgement or support. She slid several papers across her desk. These are the guardianship forms. Of course, we'll need to verify paternity officially, though the resemblance is quite convincing. Jason barely heard her. His mind was calculating with the same precision he applied to business. Margaret had been gone for 3 days. Sophia had been alone in a shelter for 3 days. His child had been mourning her grandmother with no family to comfort her. I want to take her home, he said abruptly. Tonight. The director blinked in surprise. Mr. Blackwood, while I appreciate your enthusiasm, there are procedures. I have a team of lawyers who can handle any procedures, Jason cut in. But I'm not leaving my daughter here another night. As they approached his Bentley, Sophia hesitated. Is something wrong? Jason asked. She looked up at him, vulnerability plain on her face. Are you sure you want me? The question caught him off guard, direct and devastating in its simplicity. Jason knelt down, meeting her gaze. Sophia, he said, choosing his words carefully. I didn't know about you until tonight. I have no idea how to be a father. He took a breath. But yes, I want you. We'll figure this out together. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. Okay, she said simply, and climbed into the car. Jason's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek downtown high-rise, a monument to modern luxury and meticulous design. Every piece of furniture, every artwork had been carefully selected to project success and sophistication. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was unnecessary. Until now. As the elevator doors opened directly into his foyer, Jason watched Sophia take in her surroundings. Her eyes widened at the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering city skyline, the minimalist furnishings in shades of gray and black, the abstract sculptures that cost more than most homes. This is where you live? She asked. Her voice, small in the vast space. Yes, Jason replied, suddenly seeing his home through different eyes. There were no photographs, no personal touches, nothing that suggested a life beyond work. Sophia clutched her small suitcase tighter, looking impossibly tiny against the backdrop of his carefully curated world. Let me show you your room, he said, leading her down a hallway. The guest bedroom was as impersonal as the rest of the penthouse, all clean lines and neutral tones. Jason flicked on the lights, revealing a king-sized bed that would dwarf Sophia's small frame and windows that offered the same spectacular view as the living room. It's very big, Sophia observed, setting her suitcase carefully on the floor. We'll make it more suitable tomorrow, Jason promised, realizing he had no idea what a child's room should look like. Do you need help unpacking? She shook her head. I don't have much. The statement hung between them, a reminder of the vast differences in their lives. In the kitchen, Jason stared at his refrigerator's contents, expensive wine, gourmet takeout containers, and little else. He wasn't even sure what children ate. After an awkward moment, he reached for his phone. I'll order something. What do you like? Anything is fine, Sophia replied, perching carefully on a bar stool, her legs dangling above the floor. They ate Thai food at his dining table, which had never been used for an actual family meal. Jason watched Sophia carefully cut her food into small pieces, her table manners surprisingly precise for an 8-year-old. Did your mother teach you to eat like that? He asked, immediately regretting mentioning Emily so casually. Sophia nodded. Mom said good manners matter more than fancy things. The simple wisdom struck Jason deeply. Emily had always valued authenticity over appearances. Later, as Jason stood in the doorway watching Sophia arrange her few possessions, some clothes, a worn teddy bear, and a framed photo of Emily, he felt something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. For a man who had spent his life in control, who had built an empire on calculated decisions, Jason Blackwood had just made the most impulsive choice of his life, and he had absolutely no idea what would come next. Jason couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the events of the day. The note, the shelter, those blue eyes that mirrored his own. After hours of tossing and turning, he gave up and wandered to his home office, a space dominated by award plaques and business journals. In the bottom drawer of his desk, locked away for years, was a box he'd never quite been able to discard. He hesitated before opening it, already knowing the contents would reopen wounds he'd long convinced himself had healed. Inside lay the remnants of his life with Emily. Concert tickets, handwritten notes, a watercolor sketch she'd made of him laughing, something he rarely did anymore. Jason lifted a small, worn photograph. Emily on the beach, her blonde hair whipping in the wind, her smile radiant. She had been sunshine personified, her artist's soul so different from his methodical mind. "You should have told me," he whispered, to the photograph, anger mingling with grief. "She's been alone for 3 days, Emily." A soft sound from the doorway pulled him from his thoughts. Sophia stood there in oversized pajamas someone from his staff had hastily purchased. Her blonde hair, Emily's hair, mussed from sleep. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I heard a noise." Jason hastily closed the box. "It's all right. Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head, her eyes falling on the photograph he still held. "That's Mom." "Yes," Jason said softly. "From a long time ago." Sophia entered the room cautiously, as if uncertain of her welcome. She kept a picture of you two by her bed. Something tightened in Jason's chest. "She did?" Nodding, Sophia climbed onto the leather sofa across from his desk. "She said you had important things to do, that you were building something big." Her fingers traced patterns on the leather. "She said I had your eyes." Jason studied her face. The delicate features that were clearly Emily's, but those eyes, unmistakably his own. What else had he passed on to this child he'd never known? His determination, his stubborn pride. "Did she," he began, uncertain how to phrase it, "did she talk about me often?" Sophia considered this. "Sometimes. Mostly when I asked." "She wasn't mad at you, if that's what you're wondering." But she should have been, Jason thought. She had every right to be. "She said you'd be a good dad someday," Sophia continued, "when you were ready." The words felt like a physical blow. Had Emily known she was dying? Had she somehow orchestrated this meeting from beyond, giving him one final chance to prove her right? "It's late," he said gently, unable to process the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "You should try to get some sleep." Sophia nodded and slid off the couch. At the door, she paused. "Jason?" "Yes?" "I'm glad I found you." After she left, Jason sat motionless, the photograph still in his hand. For a man who prided himself on never missing opportunities, he'd missed the most important one of all, being there for Emily and their daughter. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he would begin making things right. Morning arrived with the harsh reality that Jason Blackwood, master of billion-dollar acquisitions, had absolutely no idea how to care for an 8-year-old girl. He stood in his kitchen, staring into his refrigerator as if it might suddenly produce a child-appropriate breakfast. "Do you have any cereal?" Sophia asked, appearing beside him in yesterday's clothes, her hair pulled back in a slightly lopsided ponytail. Jason closed the refrigerator. "I don't think so. I usually just have coffee." Sophia nodded solemnly, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected about him. "Mom said you can't think properly without breakfast." The innocent comment so casually delivered made his chest tighten. How many other little nuggets of wisdom had Emily shared about him? She was right, he conceded. "Let's go out for breakfast, and then we need to get you some things." An hour later, they were walking through a department store, a completely foreign experience for Jason. He typically had personal shoppers handle such mundane tasks. Now, surrounded by children's clothing, he felt oddly vulnerable. "Pick whatever you like," he said, gesturing vaguely around them. Sophia looked up at him uncertainly. "Anything?" "Of course." She bit her lip, then moved cautiously through the racks, occasionally touching a sleeve or a collar but selecting nothing. After several minutes of this hesitation, Jason realized the problem. "Sophia," he said gently, crouching to her eye level. "You don't need to worry about the cost." She shifted uncomfortably. Mom always said to check the price tag first. Another knife twist of reality. While he'd been amassing wealth, Emily had been teaching their daughter financial caution. That was good advice, he acknowledged. But today is different. This is necessary, not extra. Slowly, Sophia began selecting items. Practical choices mostly, nothing frivolous. She checked with him before each edition, her eyes seeking approval, until he insisted she didn't need to ask. In the toy section, Sophia finally showed genuine interest, her eyes lighting up at an art set with paints, brushes, and a small easel. "Do you like to paint?" Jason asked, already knowing the answer. She nodded. "Mom taught me. She said it helps put feelings on paper when words are too hard." Jason added the art set to their cart without hesitation. "You inherited that from her. She was very talented." "I know," Sophia said softly. She sold paintings sometimes when bills were tight. Each casual revelation was another reminder of how different their lives had been. His filled with excess, theirs with careful budgeting. Now these worlds were colliding, with an 8-year-old girl caught in between. 3 days into their new arrangement, a delicate routine began to form. Jason had cleared his schedule as much as possible, delegating meetings and postponing business, trips, actions that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. His executive team was confused by the sudden change, but he offered minimal explanation. The press hadn't yet discovered Sophia's existence, and he intended to keep it that way as long as possible. Each morning, Jason woke early, answered critical emails, and then prepared a simple breakfast before Sophia emerged from her room. There, meals were quiet affairs, but the silence had begun to feel less strained. "I need to enroll you in school," Jason said over toast and eggs. The education coordinator recommended several options. Sophia pushed her scrambled eggs around her plate. "Do you miss school?" he asked, realizing he knew almost nothing about her academic life. She shrugged. "I like learning, but kids sometimes ask questions when things are different." Jason understood immediately. Questions about her mother, and now questions about suddenly living with a father who had been absent for 8 years. "We'll find somewhere good," he promised. "Somewhere you'll feel comfortable." That evening, as Jason worked in his home office, a piercing cry shattered the quiet. He bolted from his chair and raced to Sophia's room, his heart pounding. She was thrashing in her sleep, tears streaming down her face. "Mom," she cried. "Don't go." Jason froze in the doorway, paralyzed by the raw grief in her voice. This was beyond his expertise. Spreadsheets and market projections couldn't help here. "Sophia," he said softly, approaching her bed. "Sophia, wake up. It's just a dream." Her eyes flew open, disoriented and fearful. For a moment she looked confused by his presence, as if expecting someone else. Then reality crashed back. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping tears with small fists. "Don't apologize," Jason said, sitting awkwardly on the edge of her bed. "Bad dreams are normal." She nodded, pulling her knees to her chest. The silence stretched between them until Jason, with no clue what else to do, simply reached out and took her small hand in his. To his surprise, Sophia didn't pull away. Her fingers curled around his, holding on as if to anchor herself. They sat like that, connected by this simple touch, until her breathing steadied and the tension in her shoulders eased. "Would you like some water?" he asked finally. She shook her head. "Could you just stay a little longer?" So Jason Blackwood, CEO of a global enterprise, sat holding his daughter's hand until she fell back asleep. Client calls and quarterly projections. Forgotten. The next morning, Jason found a drawing on his desk, a slightly awkward but unmistakable portrait of him, rendered in careful strokes of colored pencil. At the bottom, Sophia had written, "Thank you for staying." The protective bubble Jason had created around their newfound routine burst on a Tuesday morning. His phone buzzed with urgent messages from his PR director. "Call immediately. Story. Breaking about your daughter." Jason's stomach dropped. He'd known this moment would come but had hoped for more time. Time for Sophia to adjust. Time for him to figure out how to shield her from the inevitable scrutiny. "Mr. Blackwood," his PR director said when he called, "the Daily Chronicle is running a piece tomorrow. Billionaire's secret love child discovered. They have photos of you and Sophia at the department store. We need a statement." Jason glanced at Sophia's closed bedroom door. She was getting ready for her first day at Westridge Academy, an exclusive private school where he hoped she might find stability. "Release nothing," he instructed. "No confirmations, no denials. I'll handle this myself." When Sophia emerged wearing her new uniform, navy blazer with the school crest, pleated skirt, hair neatly brushed, Jason felt a surge of protectiveness unlike anything he'd experienced before. "You look very official," he said, attempting lightness. She tugged at her collar nervously. "Is it okay if I'm scared?" The simple honesty of her question caught him off guard. In his world, admitting fear was taboo, a weakness to be concealed at all costs. "Of course it's okay," he said. "New beginnings are always a little scary." During the car ride, he debated whether to warn her about the media story. Would it be better for her to be prepared, or would it only add to her anxiety about the first day? "Sophia," he began carefully, "there might be some attention coming our way about you living with me." She looked up from her lap. "What kind of attention?" "The newspapers sometimes write stories about me, about my work and my personal life." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Because you're important?" "Because I'm rich," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." When they arrived at Westridge, Jason walked her to the administration building, aware of the curious glances from other parents. By afternoon, the story had exploded. Jason's security team reported photographers stationed outside both his office, building, and the penthouse. When he picked Sophia up from school, she climbed silently into the car. "How was your first day?" he asked. She stared out the window. "Madison asked if it was true that you didn't want me until my grandmother died." Jason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know." Her voice was small. "Is it true?" The question hung between them, devastating in its simplicity. Traffic crawled around them as Jason struggled to find the right words. "I didn't know about you," he finally said. "If I had known, things would have been different." "How different?" she pressed. Jason looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and spoke from a place of honesty he rarely accessed. "I don't know, Sophia, but I'm glad you're here now." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was the truth. And in a world where appearances often mattered more than reality, perhaps that was what they both needed most. "My name is Sophia Harrison. At least it was until last week when Mr. Blackwood, Jason, told me I could use his last name if I wanted to. I said I'd think about it. Mom would probably understand if I changed it. She always said that despite everything, he was still my father. I keep my special drawing hidden under my pillow. It's of Jason and me holding hands, standing in front of this big glass building where we live. I worked really hard on it, but I'm afraid to show him. What if he doesn't like it? Or worse, what if he just says he likes it because he feels like he has to? Miss Peterson, my art teacher, says I have talent just like my mother. She told me yesterday when I finished my painting for the showcase. It's a lighthouse on a cliff. The same one Mom and I visited last summer before she got too sick to travel. She'd said the lighthouse reminded her of Jason, standing tall and guiding others, but always a little bit apart from everything else. Your painting has remarkable depth for someone your age, Miss Peterson said. But I didn't tell her that I know all about depth. When you watch someone you love disappear a little more each day, you learn about the deepest kinds of feelings. I wonder if Jason is going to leave too. Not like Mom did. I know that's different. But in his own way. He tries so hard sometimes, like when he makes breakfast or asks about school, but his phone is always buzzing, and his mind seems far away. The night I had that bad dream and interrupted his meeting, I saw something in his eyes that scared me, like I was a problem he didn't know how to solve. Madison asked me at school today if it was cool having a billionaire. Dad. I just shrugged. How do you explain that you'd trade all the fancy stuff just to have someone who really wants you around? When that social worker lady came, she asked if I was happy here. I didn't know what to say. There are moments when it feels like maybe this could work. Like when Jason read to me or when he framed my drawing of him. But then I remember how Mom used to say that Jason loved his work more than anything. And I see how he looks at his phone. When it rings, like he's being pulled away from a temporary obligation back to his real life. The Seattle trip scares me. Miss Rebecca is nice, but she's not family. After he leaves, will he realize life is easier without an 8-year-old complicating everything? Mom always said I shouldn't expect too much from him. He has his own path, she'd tell me. But sometimes, at night, I still imagine what it would be like if he decided I was part of his path too. Yesterday, I overheard him arguing with someone on the phone about the Seattle trip. I understand the stakes, he said, sounding frustrated, but the timeline is problematic. Was he talking about me? Am I the problem with his timeline? Jason sat in his office staring at the acquisition proposal that would cement Blackwood Enterprises as the dominant force in international markets. The Seattle deal represented everything he'd worked for: global expansion, unprecedented profit margins, and the board chairmanship he'd coveted for years. There was just one problem. Closing the IABF deal would require his presence in Seattle for at least 3 weeks. 3 weeks away from Sophia. Mr. Blackwood, Rebecca stood in the doorway. The board is waiting in the conference room. Jason nodded, straightening his tie. Has the school called? Nothing today, Rebecca replied. She hesitated, then added, Sophia's art show is still on the calendar for next Friday. Should I adjust your schedule? The art show. Sophia had mentioned it just once, casually over breakfast. My painting was selected for the student showcase. She hadn't asked if he would attend, hadn't made a point of the date or time. It was as if she was protecting herself from potential disappointment. Keep it on the calendar, Jason said firmly, in the boardroom. 12 expectant faces turned toward him as he entered. These were people who had known only the driven, uncompromising Jason Blackwood, a man for whom personal considerations were never a factor in business decisions. Gentlemen, he began, the Seattle acquisition. The presentation was flawless, the projections impeccable. Yet a part of his mind remained in a school art room where an 8-year-old girl was painting with her mother's talent. The timeline requires immediate action, the CFO emphasized. We need you in Seattle by Monday for at least 3 weeks to oversee the transition personally. Monday. The art show was Friday. Jason could attend the show and still make it to Seattle. But who would care for Sophia while he was gone? More importantly, what message would he be sending by leaving so soon after promising to be there for her? Mr. Blackwood, is the timeline acceptable? The board chairman's voice broke through his thoughts. The old Jason would have said yes without hesitation. Business always came first. But now? I need 24 hours, he said, surprising even himself. There are personal considerations I need to address. Confusion flickered across several faces. Jason Blackwood never had personal considerations. As he returned to his office, his assistant intercepted him. Mr. Blackwood, there's someone here to see you. He's quite insistent. The man waiting in his office stood as Jason entered. He was well-dressed, with sharp features and cold eyes. Robert Harrison, the man introduced himself with a firm handshake. Emily's brother. Jason's guard immediately went up. I wasn't aware Emily had a brother. We weren't close, Robert admitted. Family disagreements. But I'm here now because of my niece. Sophia, Jason said, his voice carefully neutral. Yes, I've come to discuss her future. Robert produced a folder of legal documents. I'm filing for custody. Jason stared at Robert Harrison, struggling to maintain his composure as the implications of the custody filing sank in. Emily's brother, a man who had never shown interest in his niece until now, was suddenly claiming family rights. Let me understand this clearly, Jason said, his voice deadly calm. You were absent during Emily's illness. You didn't step forward when Margaret was caring for Sophia. Yet now, when she's living with me, You suddenly decide to be the concerned uncle? Robert's expression remained impassive. Mr. Blackwood, I'm simply acting in Sophia's best interests. The courts generally favor blood relatives, especially ones with stable family structures. My wife and I have 3 children. What parenting experience do you have beyond the past few weeks? The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. Jason had been a father for less than a month. What right did he have to claim he knew what was best for Sophia? But then he thought of her nightmares, her careful smile, her drawings, the way she'd begun to trust him, tentatively and bravely. He thought of his promise and all the promises he intended to keep in the years ahead. You may share her DNA, Jason said quietly, but you are not her family. I am. After Robert left, Jason's lawyer didn't mince words. This won't be easy. Their case has merit from a traditional legal perspective. Jason checked his watch. The board was still waiting for his decision about Seattle. The art show was a week away. The custody hearing would likely be scheduled soon. Everything was converging at once, forcing him to define his priorities once and for all. That evening, he found Sophia at the dining table, homework spread before her. She looked up briefly as he entered, then returned to her math problems. How was school today? He asked, loosening his tie. Fine. We had a quiz in science. I got an A. That's excellent, Jason said. Sophia, I need to talk to you about something. She set down her pencil, her face immediately guarded. Jason recognized the expression. It was the same one he used when preparing for difficult negotiations. There's a business situation in Seattle, he began. It's important for the company. You have to go, she finished for him, her voice carefully neutral. It would be for about 3 weeks. Sophia nodded, turning back to her homework. Okay. Rebecca would stay with you, or we could arrange. It's fine, she interrupted. I understand. But her quick acceptance was worse than disappointment. It was resignation, the response of a child accustomed to adults putting other priorities first. Your art show is next Friday, Jason said. I've marked it on my calendar. Sophia looked up, genuine surprise crossing her face before she carefully masked it. You don't have to come, it's not a big deal. It is to me, Jason replied. For a fleeting moment, hope flashed in her eyes before experience tempered it. She shrugged and returned to her math problems. There was something else he needed to tell her about Robert's custody claim, but he couldn't bring himself to add another burden to her small shoulders. Not yet. Later that night, Jason stood at his office window, looking out at the city where he'd built his empire. For the first time, the gleaming skyscrapers and strategic acquisitions seemed hollow accomplishments compared to the simple trust in a child's eyes. The Jason Blackwood who had existed a month ago would never have questioned his path. But that man had never held his daughter's hand after a nightmare, or seen his own eyes looking back at him asking silently, "Will you be different from the others who left me?" Tomorrow, he would need to give the board his decision about Seattle. And somehow he would need to find a way to fight for his daughter while still honoring the company he had built. Jason stared at his laptop screen, eyes burning from fatigue. The Seattle acquisition documents blurred before him as he tried to balance preparing for the biggest deal of his career while maintaining some semblance of presence for Sophia. For days, he'd been living a double life, corporate titan during the day, awkward father figure at night. The delicate balance collapsed at 9:47 p.m. during a critical video conference with Seattle investors. Mr. Blackwood, regarding the regulatory concerns in Section 12. The investor's voice cut through the quiet of Jason's home office. A sudden cry from down the hall interrupted him. Jason froze. His attention immediately split between the business opportunity worth billions and the sound of his daughter in distress. "Excuse me one moment," he said tersely, muting the call before rushing to Sophia's room. She was sitting upright, in bed, face streaked with tears, breath coming in short gasps. Another nightmare. "Sophia," he said softly, sitting beside her. "It's all right. You're safe." "She was there," Sophia whispered. "Mom was there, and then she wasn't. And I couldn't find her anywhere." Jason placed an awkward hand on her shoulder, acutely aware of the call waiting for him, of the millions hanging in the balance. It was just a dream. His earpiece buzzed insistently. The investors were getting impatient. "I need to finish a meeting," he said, already standing. "Try to go back to sleep. We'll talk in the morning." Sophia's face fell, but she nodded. "I'm sorry I interrupted." "It's fine," Jason replied, already distracted by the buzzing earpiece. "Just please stay in bed this time." The moment the words left his mouth, he knew he'd made a terrible mistake. Sophia's expression shuttered closed, the brief vulnerability replaced by a careful blankness that was achingly familiar. It was his own defense mechanism reflected back at him. "I will," she said quietly, pulling the covers up. "Good night." Jason returned to his call, forcing his focus back to acquisition terms and market projections. He secured the preliminary agreement, a victory that should have elated him. Instead, he felt hollow, the image of Sophia's closed expression haunting him. The following days brought a subtle but unmistakable shift. Sophia was unfailingly polite, answering his questions with yes or no whenever possible, keeping conversation minimal. She stopped sharing small details about school, stopped showing him her drawings. The fragile connection they had built seemed to disintegrate, leaving them as strangers sharing a space. When the child welfare caseworker arrived for her scheduled visit, Jason was caught off guard. "This is standard procedure," Mrs. Chen explained, setting her briefcase on the coffee table. "I need to assess how Sophia is adjusting and ensure the living situation is appropriate." Jason nodded, suddenly anxious in a way board meetings never made him feel. Of course, Mrs. Chen spoke with Sophia privately while Jason waited in his office, pretending to work but actually straining to hear their muffled conversation. "Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Chen said afterward, her expression professional but concerned. "Sophia seems withdrawn. When I asked if she feels at home here, she couldn't give me a clear answer." Jason's stomach clenched. "She's adjusting. We both are." "I understand," Mrs. Chen replied gently. "But children need stability and emotional availability. Your schedule appears extremely demanding, especially with this upcoming trip." "I'll be attending her art show before I leave," Jason said defensively. Mrs. Chen made a note. "That's positive. However, I'm concerned about these 3 weeks away so early in your relationship. Have you considered that Sophia might interpret this as abandonment, especially after losing her mother?" The question struck Jason with unexpected force. He hadn't considered it that way. He'd been thinking of the trip as a business necessity, not as another loss for Sophia. "I'll be video calling daily," he said. Mrs. Chen's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Blackwood, being a parent often means making difficult choices. Sometimes the right business decision isn't the right parenting decision." After she left, Jason stood in the hallway outside Sophia's room, listening to the silence. For the first time in his career, he wondered if success had come at too high a price, and if he was about to make the same mistake again. Jason stood in the boardroom surrounded by expectant faces. The flight to Seattle was booked for Saturday morning. Contracts were prepared, and the entire future of Blackwood Enterprises hung in the balance. Everything was proceeding according to plan. "The board has convened this emergency meeting," Chairman Walter Morgan began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "to address concerns about the Seattle acquisition timeline." Jason straightened his tie, already formulating his defense. He'd anticipated some pushback after requesting minor adjustments to accommodate Sophia's art show. "To be blunt, Jason," Walter continued, "several board members have expressed concern about your commitment to this acquisition given your recent personal developments." A tense silence filled the room. Everyone present knew about Sophia now. The story had run in every business publication, complete with speculation about how Jason's secret daughter might affect the company's future. "My commitment to Blackwood Enterprises remains absolute," Jason replied evenly. "The slight schedule adjustment doesn't impact our strategic position." Richard Carter, the most aggressive board member, leaned forward. "With respect, Jason, this company wasn't built on slight schedule adjustments. It was built on absolute dedication and singular focus, qualities you've always embodied." Until now. The implication hung heavy in the air. Jason felt a familiar surge of defensive pride. These men had watched him sacrifice everything for this company. They expected nothing less now. "What exactly are you suggesting, Richard?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "We're suggesting," Walter interjected, "that you need to make your priorities clear. Either commit fully to this acquisition, which means departing for Seattle tomorrow and remaining for the required 3 weeks, or perhaps consider a temporary step back from operations during this adjustment period in your personal life." The ultimatum was delivered with corporate politeness, but Jason recognized it for what it was: a threat. Prove your loyalty or lose your power. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated. The school's number flashed on the screen. Jason rarely took calls during board meetings, but something, instinct perhaps, made him excuse himself. "Mr. Blackwood." The school counselor's voice was calm but concerned. "There's been an incident with Sophia. She became extremely upset during a family tree exercise in class. She's with me now, but she's asking for you." Jason's chest tightened. "I'll be there right away." He returned to the boardroom, already reaching for his suit jacket. "Gentlemen, I need to leave. Family emergency." Richard scoffed audibly. "This is exactly what concerns us." Jason paused at the door, something shifting fundamentally inside him. "This meeting is adjourned until tomorrow. I'll have my decision for you then." 30 minutes later, Jason was sitting in the school counselor's office where Sophia sat curled in a chair, her small frame turned inward, eyes red from crying. "What happened?" he asked gently. The counselor explained. The class was creating family trees. When another student asked why Sophia was only drawing herself and her mother, a rather insensitive discussion ensued about absent fathers and orphans. Jason winced, imagining Sophia facing those questions alone. "Can we go home?" Sophia whispered, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. "Home, not your house or the apartment. Home." The significance wasn't lost on Jason. The drive back was quiet, until Sophia finally spoke. "Are you mad that you had to leave work?" Jason glanced at her, surprised. "No." "Why would you think that?" She shrugged, looking out the window. "Mom said your work was the most important thing to you." The words stung because they had been true. For years, nothing had mattered more than building his empire, proving himself, accumulating success and power. "Things change, Sophia," he said carefully. "People change." Back at the penthouse, Jason made hot chocolate, something his own mother had done for him as a child. They sat together at the kitchen counter, an unlikely pair finding comfort in the simple ritual. "I didn't know what to put on my family tree," Sophia admitted, her fingers curled around her mug. "The other kids have grandparents and siblings, and pets. I just had Mom. And now?" Her voice trailed off, the unspoken loss hanging between them. "Now you have me," Jason said softly. Sophia looked up, studying him with those piercing blue eyes so like his own. "For how long?" The question cut through all pretense, all corporate diplomatic language. This was the true negotiation, the one that actually mattered. "For as long as you need me," Jason answered. "For always, even if it means missing important business things." Jason thought about the board meeting, the ultimatum, the Seattle deal, all the trappings of success he'd spent his life pursuing. Then he looked at this small, fierce person who carried his blood and Emily's spirit, who had already lost too much. "Yes," he said with certainty. Even then. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, Jason sat in his office staring at the framed drawing she had made of him. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Board members, investors, the Seattle team, all demanding answers, commitments, decisions. Rebecca appeared in the doorway. "The board is expecting your decision by morning." Jason nodded. "I know." "Sir," she hesitated, then continued with unusual candor. "I've worked with you for 7 years. I've never seen you waver on a business decision before. I've never had a daughter before, he replied simply. Rebecca smiled slightly. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice, whichever one it is. After she left, Jason picked up his phone and dialed Walter's number. When the chairman answered, Jason spoke with the same decisive tone he'd used to build his company. I'll be attending my daughter's art show on Friday. After that, I'll join the team in Seattle via video conference. My physical presence isn't required for this acquisition to succeed, and you know it. There was a long pause before Walter replied. The board won't be pleased. Then they can vote me out, Jason said calmly. But I suspect our shareholders would prefer a CEO who can innovate around obstacles rather than simply bulldoze through them. He ended the call feeling lighter than he had in years. Tomorrow would bring consequences, perhaps severe ones. But for tonight, Jason Blackwood knew with absolute certainty that he had passed the true test. The next morning, as he prepared to face the board, his lawyer called with troubling news. Robert Harrison has expedited the custody hearing. It's scheduled for next Wednesday, right before your Seattle trip. His filing claims your work commitments make you an unsuitable guardian. Jason's jaw tightened. He's been watching us. It appears so. The timing is suspicious. What are our chances? His lawyer hesitated. With your travel plans and the board conflicts, it doesn't look good. The courts tend to favor stability and presence over financial resources. Then I need to demonstrate both, Jason said firmly. I'll see you at the office in an hour. When he entered the boardroom, the tension was palpable. Without preamble, Jason laid out his alternative plan. I've restructured the Seattle acquisition team. Rebecca will lead on-site operations while I maintain oversight via daily video conferences. The regulatory issues will be handled by our legal team, with me joining remotely for critical negotiations. Walter's expression darkened. This is highly irregular. So is my situation, Jason replied evenly. Gentlemen, I've never asked for accommodation in 15 years of building this company. I'm asking now, not because I'm any less committed, but because I have a more important commitment to honor. To a child you've known for less than a month, Richard interjected. Jason met his gaze steadily. To my daughter, who has lost everyone else she's ever loved. To a promise I made that I would be different from those who abandoned her. The room fell silent. Finally, Walter spoke. We'll take your proposal under advisement and reconvene after the quarterly reports are filed. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't outright rejection either. Jason would take it, for now. That afternoon he arrived early at Westridge Academy, slipping into the back of Sophia's art class. She hadn't seen him yet, focused intently on the canvas before her. Her small hands moved with purpose, adding delicate strokes to her lighthouse painting. Miss Peterson noticed him and approached quietly. She's quite talented, Mr. Blackwood. Emily would be proud. I know, Jason said softly. I just wish I'd known earlier. You're here now, the teacher replied. That's what matters. When Sophia finally spotted him, her eyes widened in surprise. You came to my class? I wanted to see you work, Jason said simply. Your mother was creating a masterpiece when I first met her too. The smile that bloomed across Sophia's face was worth every confrontation, every risk to his career. For the first time, Jason understood what Emily had known all along, that some things were worth sacrificing everything for. The courtroom felt sterile and cold as Jason straightened his tie and prepared for the most important negotiation of his life. Unlike the boardroom where he commanded absolute authority, here he was just another petitioner at the mercy of the system. For 2 weeks, the custody battle had consumed every aspect of his life. Board meetings were delegated. The Seattle acquisition moved forward without his direct involvement. And for the first time in Blackwood Enterprises history, Jason had formally activated his emergency succession plan, naming Rebecca as acting CEO while he focused solely on keeping Sophia. All rise, called the bailiff as Judge Martinez entered the courtroom. Jason stood, glancing at Sophia, who sat with her court-appointed advocate in the front row. She looked small in her navy dress, her blonde hair pulled back neatly, her eyes wide as she took in the imposing room. Robert Harrison and his wife presented a picture-perfect image of traditional family values. Their attorney wasted no time establishing their qualifications. Your Honor, my clients have raised 3 successful children. They have a stable marriage, strong community ties, and a family home with space for Olivia to thrive. Most importantly, they share blood ties with the child, ties that Mr. Blackwood does not and cannot claim. When Robert himself took the stand, he spoke with practiced sincerity. We simply want what's best for our niece. Mr. Blackwood is a businessman first and foremost. His lifestyle involves extensive travel, unpredictable hours, and a singular focus on corporate success that leaves little room for parenting. Jason's attorney countered with evidence of the changes he'd made: the modified work schedule, the permanent guardianship petition, the college fund established in Sophia's name. Yet Jason could see doubt in the judge's eyes. When his turn came to testify, Jason abandoned the carefully prepared statement his lawyers had crafted. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. Your Honor, I'm not going to pretend I'm a perfect father. 8 weeks ago, I didn't even know I had a daughter. I've made mistakes, plenty of them. I've been learning on the job every single day. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But there's something the Harrison family doesn't understand. Being a parent isn't about perfection. It's about choice. Every day since Sophia came into my life, I've chosen her. I've chosen to be there for her nightmares, to learn which breakfast cereal she prefers, to sit through animated movies I don't understand. Jason turned slightly toward Sophia, whose eyes never left his face. I chose to attend her art showcase instead of flying to Seattle for the biggest deal of my career. I chose to step back from running my company to fight for her in this courtroom. And if given the chance, I'll keep choosing her over business, over money, over everything for the rest of my life. He turned back to the judge. The Harrison family may share Sophia's DNA, but they don't know that she sleeps with her mother's photograph next to her bed. They don't know that she hums when she paints, just like Emily did. They don't know that she's brave and kind and smarter than most adults I know. His voice caught slightly. They claim blood makes them family, but they weren't there when Emily was dying. They weren't there when Sophia had no one. I may have entered her life late, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. The courtroom fell silent when he finished. Even Robert looked uncomfortable. The pivotal moment came when Rebecca unexpectedly requested to testify. She presented a timeline chronicling Jason's transformation from the moment he'd received Sophia's note through each subsequent choice he'd made to prioritize his daughter. I've worked with Mr. Blackwood for 7 years, she concluded. In that time, I've watched him build an empire with single-minded focus, but nothing, not closing billion-dollar deals or winning industry awards, has ever made him as genuinely happy as being Sophia's father. When the judge called a brief recess to consider her ruling, Jason knelt before Sophia in the hallway. No matter what happens, he promised, we'll face it together. For the first time since the custody battle began, Sophia wrapped her arms around his neck. I know, she whispered. When Judge Martinez returned, her expression gave nothing away. She reviewed her notes carefully before looking up. In matters of custody, this court must consider what arrangement best serves the child's interests, not the adults involved. Mr. Harrison presents a traditional family structure with stability and experience. Mr. Blackwood offers a newer relationship, but has demonstrated extraordinary commitment and adaptation. She paused, looking directly at Sophia. Most compelling, however, is the clear preference expressed by Sophia herself, and the bond that has clearly formed between her and Mr. Blackwood in a remarkably short time. This court hereby grants permanent custody to Jason Blackwood, with the provision that Sophia maintain contact with her extended family, including the Harrisons, should she wish to do so. The gavel fell with finality. Jason felt Sophia's small hand slip into his. Together, they had won more than a legal battle. They had won the right to become a family on their own terms. Jason stood in the doorway of Sophia's room, coffee mug in hand, watching as the morning sunlight filtered through curtains they had chosen together. The space looked nothing like it had 3 months ago. Walls now painted a soft blue, shelves filled with books and art supplies, a bulletin board covered with drawings and mementos. It was no longer just a room in his house. It was Sophia's sanctuary. Sophia sat cross-legged on her bed, sketching, intently, her blonde hair falling across her face in a way that reminded him so much of Emily. It made his chest ache. She hadn't noticed him yet, too absorbed in her creation. The past week since the court's ruling had brought a peace neither of them had experienced before. Judge Martinez had granted Jason permanent custody, citing Sophia's clear preference and the extraordinary effort and adaptation Jason had demonstrated. The Harrison family had retreated, humbled by the testimony and evidence of Jason's commitment. "Morning, artist," Jason said softly. Sophia looked up, her face brightening. "I'm making something for your office." "Another masterpiece for my collection?" He smiled, entering the room. She nodded but kept the sketchbook angled away. "It's a surprise." His phone buzzed in his pocket, the fourth time in the past hour. The board was eager for his full return. The Seattle acquisition was proceeding faster than anticipated, and investors were clamoring for reassurance that Blackwood Enterprises remained in capable hands. Jason silenced the device without checking the message. "Pancakes?" he suggested, instead. "With blueberries?" Sophia's eyes lit up. "Is there any other way?" In the kitchen, they moved in an easy rhythm that would have been unimaginable weeks earlier. Sophia measured ingredients while Jason heated the griddle. As they worked, he considered how profoundly his priorities had shifted. The corporate titan who once scheduled his life in 15-minute increments now happily spent an hour making oddly shaped pancakes with an 8-year-old. The man who had demanded perfection from everyone around him now celebrated the beautiful messiness of family life. "Do you have important meetings today?" Sophia asked carefully, dropping blueberries into the batter. Jason flipped a pancake before answering. "Nothing that can't wait." "Because of me?" There was a hint of worry in her voice. Jason turned to face her. "Because I've realized something, Sophia. Work will always be there. The company will survive if I take a morning off. But these moments, making breakfast with you, hearing about your day, watching you grow, these moments won't wait." Sophia considered this, her expression serious. "Mom used to say, time is the most valuable thing you can give someone." "Your mother was very wise," Jason said softly. As they ate breakfast, Sophia handed him a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you." Jason opened it to find a carefully drawn family tree. Unlike the school assignment that had caused her so much distress, this one was different. At the top was Emily, her name surrounded by small painted flowers. Below were Jason and Sophia, their names connected with intricately drawn branches. "It's beautiful," he said, tracing the lines with his finger. "Miss Peterson helped me. She said family trees can look however we want them to look." Sophia pointed to a small inscription at the bottom. "This part is Mom's handwriting." In the corner was a quote Jason recognized from one of Emily's letters. "Love isn't found in grand gestures but in daily choices." "I found it in her journal," Sophia explained. "I think she would be happy now." Jason felt the weight of those words, the forgiveness offered, the acceptance given. The family somehow formed despite everything. That afternoon, Jason made the decision he'd been contemplating for weeks. He called a board meeting and announced his intention to restructure his role at Blackwood Enterprises. He would remain as chairman, providing strategic direction, but would step back from day-to-day operations to focus on being a father. "Some of you may see this as stepping back," he told the stunned board members. "I see it as stepping forward into what truly matters." Later, as the sun began to set, Jason and Sophia stood on the balcony of their penthouse, looking out at the city, lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. "Do you miss working all the time?" Sophia asked, leaning against the railing. Jason considered the question. "I miss the certainty. Sometimes business problems have solutions. People are more complicated." "Like me?" she asked with a small smile. "Especially you," he teased gently, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "But that's what makes it worth it." Sophia's expression grew serious. I miss Mom a lot sometimes. I know, Jason said softly. I wish I'd been there sooner for both of you. But you're here now, she replied simply. In that moment, Jason Blackwood, who had spent decades building towers of glass and steel, accumulating wealth and power and believing those things defined success, finally understood what true richness meant. It wasn't found in boardrooms or bank accounts. It lived in pancake breakfasts and art projects and bedtime stories and small hands reaching for his, in second chances he hadn't deserved but had been given anyway. As Sophia slipped her hand into his, Jason looked out at the empire he had built, then down at the little girl who had changed everything. The choice between them was no choice at all. His greatest achievement would never be listed on any financial report or business magazine. It was standing right beside him, holding his hand, showing him what it meant to truly come home.